Welcome to the Filofox podcast with me, Rebecca, your personal organiser and declutter coach. Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Filofox podcast. Wow, episode 9, time's going fast, and we are currently in week 6 of the lockdown at the time of this recording. It's May 2020. And today we're going to talk a little bit about hoarding, because next week I've got a fantastic interview with Professor Nick Neves from Northern University, and they are doing some research into hoarding and how they can help people with this disorder. Now, the definition of hoarding is a compulsive need to keep things and of limited value usually. It can be difficult to recognise hoarding disorders at a lower level and very easy to recognise when it becomes extreme. Now, when you look it up in Wikipedia, it says that it started in the 1980s, but actually the first real recording of extreme hoarding was in 1947, and it was the Collier Brothers and their Collier mansion. Now, they lived together because neither of them got married, and they had quite a eccentric and reclusive upbringing with their parents, and as a result of that, their parents left everything to them, and their sister, when she passed away, left everything to them, and they collected an abundance of things like books, furniture, musical instruments. One of them was actually a concert pianist, and they're very academic but very reclusive, so much so that they set up booby traps in their house to deter any unwanted guests. Now, that's serious hoarding. And when they'd both passed away, the people that went in to empty the property found 140 tons of things. Unbelievable. And that's in an extreme case. Now, hoarding tends to start, from the research they've done so far, in the adolescent years, and can be as a result of trauma or living in a dysfunctional environment. And people who have a tendency to be depressed or anxious can sometimes develop hoarding tendencies, and these can go on to actually be a full-blown hoarding disorder. Now, these things don't really show up until people are in their 40s, 50s and 60s, because let's face it takes a little bit of time to collect things and store things. And that brings me on to collections. Some people think that people are hoarders who actually have collections of the same thing, and they're not. They're actually collectors of those items, and they're very well organised, they're stored correctly, and they're catalogued, and the person that owns these collections usually knows every single item that they've got and have a good knowledge of them and where they are. Then you have the collector hoarder type of people that have large collections of a lot of different things, and they don't have the same order or the same knowledge. In fact, they'll forget what they've got, and it's only when they sort of sort through looking for other things that they find these things. And there's a lot of collector hoarders in the community. And then you've got hoarders who collect everything, and they really can't bear to part with anything, and that can include things like empty cartons from food, carrier bags, newspapers, paper bags, mail, envelopes, paper, and that's sort of at the more extreme end. And it starts to become a problem when either the environment that they live in is at risk, so it might be fire risk or environmental risk, or they can't function, things like not being able to cook or keep up their hygiene for themselves, personal hygiene, and in their home. It is a disorder, and it's not attributed to specific mental health problems, but hoarders tend to have some emotional problems, which can be, like I said earlier, anxiety, depression, social anxiety, and it stops them functioning when it gets too extreme, and it can be a real problem for them. People who have hoarding tendencies tend to collect things like shoes, magazines, books, electrical equipment, and it might break and they still won't part with it. And a lot of you've seen food and lots of tins of food, and they may be out of date, and bric-a-brac, but the actual figures show that 2 to 5% have a hoarding disorder. And some research has put levels to this type of hoarding. So you can imagine in OCD there are variants, in minimalism there are variants, and in clutter there are variants. And the same is to be said of hoarding. And there's 5 levels that they've identified. Level 1 being not really noticeable. There's a collection of things, but you can't see them. And people are really happy for you to come into their house. They haven't become reclusive, and they're proud of their house, but they have these collections that are not really visible to the eye. Or if they are, they might be in a sort of tidy-ish space, so you don't really recognise that. And then level 2, you're getting to the point where maybe an exit to the house becomes blocked because of these things. And there might be some broken items about, particularly appliances that haven't been sorted out. There may be some slight structural damage in the property that hasn't been sorted out and be over 6 months old. And there might be some mildew in the bathroom, and you can get a sense of things are starting to fail a little bit, and that people are starting to let go a little bit. So there's lots of cobwebs, and there might be some sign of rodents or infestation a bit, but not at a level that's too noticeable, and there may be some odour starting to come into the home. Level 3 is where there's 1 or 2 or 3 exits blocked. Some of the rooms aren't usable because they're so full of things. There's emotional distress and shame about everything that they've got, and people are starting to get to the point where they don't want anybody to visit. They're not going to invite anybody in. They might be happy to go out, but they don't really want anybody to come into their house. And if they share this space with other people, they're suffering as well because of the hoarding, and they might be ashamed of what's going on in the house as well. So their social life is affected as well. Level 4, it's getting pretty serious now, and the personal hygiene is noticeable, not bathed for weeks. The house smells. There's definite signs of infestation of all kinds. There's rotting food. There's cluttered surfaces. There's piles of things everywhere. It's difficult to get around and navigate around the house. A lot of the rooms are shut off because they're so full of stuff. And it's a time when they're starting to spill out into the community, and the community that surround them are starting to notice that things aren't quite right. They may notice that there's some rotting food, lots of bin bags, things like that, or furniture in the garden, or things are starting to get out of control to the point that it's affecting everybody else outside of their home, and there may be fire risk or environmental risks, and external people are having to be called in to sort it out. And then level 5 is it's inhabitable, structurally damaged. There's no surface area at all. It's definitely infested. There's signs of human excrement. There's infestation of all kinds of insects and rodents, and it really is in a terrible state. Now, in terms of that level 4 and extremities of that, in the past, the councils and social housing have evicted people, but they've realised that it's not really a good thing to do. You're just moving one problem to another problem. So they've started to look at it more sensitively and realise that people aren't intentionally hoarding. It's come from certain behaviours, certain upbringing, conditioning, trauma. and they need to get other people involved to help them. The thing about hoarding, there isn't one cure, one size doesn't fit all. And it may be that somebody would benefit from certain types of therapy, but it's finding that ingredient or ingredients that would help them psychologically to move forwards. The level with which I deal with hoarding tends to be level 1 and 2, where things are very much covering surfaces. There is some tiny bit of hygiene, maybe a lot of dust, and it needs cleaning up, but once it's done, and the people that I deal with have recognised they're heading in the wrong direction and they're not liking it and they feel out of control, and they're so brave, they really, really are so brave, because they call me in, and there is that shame, and it's my job to reassure every individual person that I go and help that there's no judgment, it's absolutely fine and we'll sort it out, and give them the confidence that we are going to sort it out. But I don't go and sort it out, we sort it out, because otherwise then you're just being an enabler, and they will continue to repeat those behaviours over and over again, and you'll be called in again in maybe a year's time when they've collected more things. And I'm not saying that people don't collect things, because even when we declutter, we should do it regularly, we should revisit all the time just to keep ourselves in check, because we're human beings and we do buy things and they make us feel good, and unless you're very, very strict with yourself, you are going to collect a few more things, or items might break, you might change your clothing, you might decide that you don't want certain things anymore. So it is a revisiting process, and it's the same with hoarding. And you have to remember that every single person is different, and that their needs are different, and they're at a different stage, and they have to be willing to work with you and take action with you and have you back, because it's a bit like, again, I talk about when you put on weight or you do something over a long period of time, it's not going to happen overnight. That change isn't going to happen tomorrow. You're not going to suddenly lose 2 or 3 stone. You're going to have to do a little bit of work, and you're going to have to work at it, and you have to want to do it, so you have to be ready. And there's that little bit like in this coronavirus time where you're motivated one week, and then you'll get a day when you're not, and then you're suddenly motivated again, and then you're not, and you have to help people ride through that. But when they start to see that the little bits of work that they're doing every single day all week, and they start developing some kind of clarity within their mindset where they're thinking, actually, this is feeling good, this feels so wonderful that I want to keep this going. And that's what happens with all projects. You always have to start at some point, recognise that you need to start, call in for the help, and then work through it over and over again. And by the time you get to the end, hopefully you'll feel so fantastic, you'll never ever get back to the point. You might drop back a little bit, but you'll keep it in check and keep going and keep going. So that's a little bit about hoarding. I'm really looking forward to sharing Nick's knowledge with you. It's fascinating what he's been doing and the surveys they've been sending out, and looking at how they can help this particular part of the population. They were really suffering, the silent sufferers in social housing. It spills out and it's recognised, but those who own their own properties, that they're behind closed doors, and sometimes you hear of people who have sadly passed away and they're in such a mess when people have actually gone in. So it is a problem. It does come up quite a lot, and these sort of hoarding tendencies, the lower levels, it might help us look at what we've got collected. Have we collected certain things? Do we know everything that we've got? And is it everything that we need? And then we go back to the decluttering again. Hope you all have a great week. Stay safe, stay home, and change is on its way. Let's look at what we've got in our environment. We can control that. We can't control what's going on outside at the moment, but we can control our environment, and let's make it a lovely place, a place that you enjoy working in if you have to work, and living in and sharing it with people if you share it with people. And if you're in just one room and you've got a lot of things, think about how you can change that, and it might be storing them correctly until there comes a time when you can let them go, which will be just some few weeks ahead of us at the moment. We can't actually part with things the way we'd like to, but we can start making plans to do that. If you'd like to have any questions answered during this podcast, please send them to info@fileafox.co.uk. On my website, which is fileafox.co.uk, I have now launched a masterclass to help you through the decluttering process. It's in the resources page, as is a free download of a meditation, help you relax for 10 minutes, and other bits and pieces are going to be added very, very soon. Thank you. Bye for now.